Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something really thought-provoking. It's about what really drives someone to share knowledge, especially, religious teachings.
Yeah, that's a big one.
We've got this fascinating text. It was originally in Sinhala, and it gives this surprisingly nuanced take.
It really does. It shifts the focus, doesn't it? Away from just the teachings.
Exactly. And onto the teacher's inner world. It kind of makes you wonder, are there hidden motivations sometimes, even when things look good on the surface?
Right. Those subtle currents, even when the intention seems pure.
So our mission for this deep dive is basically to unpack this perspective.
Get into its arguments.
Yeah. Understand the key ideas and think about how it relates more broadly to, well, why any of us share what we know.
It's relevant beyond just religious teaching, for sure.
Absolutely. So if you ever paused and thought about the real reasons someone's sharing something with you, well, you're in the right place.
Definitely.
Okay, let's get into it. The text starts off by acknowledging something pretty straightforward. That the wish to share the Dharma, these teachings, can genuinely come from a good place. Kusala Chanda. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Kusala Chanda, it basically means a wholesome intention.
Wholesome intention, okay.
Yeah, a desire that's rooted in goodwill, wanting to benefit others, wanting to guide people onto a good path.
Right, makes sense. A positive starting point.
Definitely.
But then, here's where it gets tricky and really interesting.
This is the core of it, yeah.
The text says a subtle kind of greed, lābha, is the word used.
Lābha, yes. Greed or attachment.
For things like recognition, maybe status, praise, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Gain, honor, praise.
It says this can creep in even if the person consciously dislikes the idea of teaching for those rewards. How does that work? It seems contradictory.
Well, that's what's so insidious about it, according to this text. The desire is there, maybe subconsciously.
Okay.
And because the person rejects the idea of teaching for profit or fame?
The greed doesn't just vanish.
No. It finds another way. It disguises itself. Oh, okay. And the disguise is a sense of duty. Is that right?
Precisely. It sort of latches on to this idea of obligation. I have to teach. It's my responsibility.
So they start to genuinely believe they're acting purely out of this, noble duty.
Yes. The text suggests they can be completely convinced. It's a form of self-deception, really.
Wow.
The underlying unacknowledged greed for praise or status is still driving things, but it's masked.
So it's like the mind finding a loophole.
You could put it that way, yeah. And this subtle influence then starts to affect their actual behavior.
How so? What happens then?
Well, the text argues that this person might become, say, hesitant.
Hesitant to teach.
Yeah, hesitant to teach where there's no prospect of those hidden rewards, no chance for praise, no audience to impress, maybe no status gain.
But they wouldn't realize that's the real reason for their reluctance.
Exactly. They might rationalize it differently, find other excuses perhaps, but the root, according to this perspective, is that masked desire.
Okay, so the focus shifts.
It subtly moves away from the original goal. Maybe that's swargamoksha, spiritual liberation for others.
Right, guiding people towards that.
And it becomes more about pleasing the audience, getting that admiration.
That's the idea. The perhaps unconscious goal becomes winning approval, getting positive feedback, enhancing one's own standing.
And this shift, this hidden motivation, it actually affects the teachings themselves.
That's the crucial consequence highlighted in the text. It argues that the message itself gets, distorted, tainted.
Distorted how? What does it become?
It becomes something the text calls pratirūpaka dharma.
Pratirūpaka dharma.
Yeah, which means something like an imitation dharma, a counterfeit.
Like it looks like the real thing, sounds similar.
Exactly. It might use the right words, contain some original elements, but the underlying motivation has subtly warped its essence. It's no longer the pure teaching.
That's a really powerful idea. It's not just about religion, is it? You could see that anywhere.
Absolutely. Think about information online or even in academia or business. Knowledge that looks right, but is maybe driven by selling something or clicks or status.
Yeah, that really hits home. And the text makes a point of contrasting this self-deception with people who are openly teaching for profit, right?
Yes, that's an important distinction it draws.
How so?
It basically says, look, the person who's openly out for gain, they aren't fooling themselves.
Right. They know what they're doing.
They know they're potentially deceiving others for their own benefit. The first case, the self-deceived teacher, is different because they are, in a way, the first victim of their own hidden motive.
Which almost makes it more insidious, like you said earlier.
It can be, yeah, because the lack of self-awareness is key.
Okay, so let's step back a bit. What are the big takeaways here? What should we be thinking about after wrestling with this?
Well, I think the first one is just how incredibly subtle human motivation can be.
Yeah, definitely.
This text really highlights that things aren't always what they seem, even with apparently good actions. We kind of need to look beyond the surface.
For sure. And the second point, which is tied right into that,
is the importance of the intention itself, the purity of the intention.
Right, it's not just a side detail. The why behind sharing knowledge seems to fundamentally shape its quality, its authenticity.
That idea of pratirūpaka dharma, the imitation teaching, really snicks. It suggests the motivation actually changes the substance of what's shared.
It makes me think about times I've encountered ideas that felt, I don't know, watered down or somehow off. And you wonder, maybe the speaker's underlying drive played a role in that.
It certainly prompts that kind of reflection, and maybe for you listening, too.
Yeah, have you ever been in a situation where someone's stated reasons just didn't quite seem to fit their actions?
It's something we probably all notice now and then, isn't it?
Definitely. And how does this perspective, which comes from, thinking about ancient religious teaching, how does it apply today?
Well, I think the parallels are pretty clear.
Like with online content, educators, even just colleagues sharing info at work.
Absolutely. It encourages us to be maybe a bit more discerning.
Discerning about what we consume, but also what we share.
And maybe thinking about the potential motivations behind it all. Not just the content, but the source, the presenter.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive into the pasted text, the core message seems to be this potent warning.
A warning about a very subtle kind of greed.
One that can hide itself, disguise itself as duty.
And in doing so, undermine even seemingly virtuous acts like sharing important knowledge.
And the big emphasis is on how much the purity of that initial intention matters.
Yeah, it's not just a nice to have. The text argues it profoundly shapes the authenticity and the real impact of what's being shared.
It's definitely made me think, examining my own reasons for sharing things.
Yeah.
It's humbling.
It is. Even when you think you have the best intentions, there can be subtle things at play.
So a final thought for you to take away and maybe mull over. Considering this distinction the text draws between that genuine, pure intention and these other, more deceptive or self-deceptive motives, how might you approach information differently?
Both when you're receiving it and when you're the one sharing it.
Exactly. What subtle motivations might be bubbling under the surface, in yourself or in others, that maybe deserve a closer look?